was reviewing patient charts in my office on the 12th floor of St. Margaret's Medical Center when my assistant knocked and said, "Dr. Thompson, your 3 p.m. consultation is here." I looked at the appointment schedule and felt my breath catch. The name looking back at me was one that had haunted family dinners for the past 7 years, Rebecca Thompson, my sister. The same sister who, just 2 months ago at our cousin's graduation party, had rolled her eyes when I mentioned working at the hospital and said, "At least someone in this family isn't afraid to aim higher than basic healthcare work."
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Rebecca had no idea that the entry-level hospital job she'd been dismissing for years was actually me serving as the head of cardiothoracic surgery at one of the most prestigious medical centers on the West Coast. She had no idea that her older sister Alice, the one she called professionally limited and content with small goals, was the surgeon she was about to meet regarding her own heart condition. And she definitely had no idea that I'd been quietly building a medical career that had earned me recognition in journals she'd never heard of while she was busy climbing the corporate ladder at marketing firms. My name is Dr. Alice Thompson, and what happened in that consultation room would forever change how my sister viewed success, ambition, and the quiet determination she'd spent years mistaking for lack of drive. But to understand how we got to this moment, you need to understand the foundation that was laid in our childhood home in suburban Phoenix, where two sisters developed completely different definitions of achievement and completely different approaches to building a life that mattered. It started when we were kids in our family's split-level house on Maple Street. Rebecca was born with what our mother called natural charisma. She was loud, demanding, and magnetic in the way that made adults stop what they were doing to pay attention to her opinions. When she was 5 years old, she convinced our neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, to hire her as his business consultant for his landscaping company, which mostly involved her drawing pictures of flower arrangements and charging him a quarter for each professional recommendation. I was different. When I was 5, I was the kid who brought injured birds to our back porch and spent hours trying to figure out how to help them heal. I'd create little hospitals out of shoeboxes, complete with cotton ball beds and makeshift splints made from popsicle sticks. While Rebecca was performing for audiences, I was quietly observing how things worked, how they broke, and how they could be fixed. Our parents, Dr. Patricia Thompson, a family physician, and Robert Thompson, a high school principal, saw these differences and made decisions that would shape the trajectory of our entire relationship. Rebecca was the natural leader who needed to be challenged and given platforms to showcase her abilities. I was the caring helper who would thrive in supportive roles where I could assist others behind the scenes. The pattern was established early and reinforced constantly. When Rebecca announced she wanted to run for class president in 3rd grade, our parents spent weeks helping her develop campaign strategies, design posters, and practice speeches. When I expressed interest in the same election, they gently suggested I could be Rebecca's campaign manager instead. "Alice is so good at organizing and supporting other people's success," Mom would tell other parents. "She's going to make someone a wonderful assistant someday." By middle school, the roles were set in stone. Rebecca was student council president, while I managed volunteer schedules for the school's peer tutoring program. She was captain of the debate team, while I researched statistics and organized evidence folders that made her arguments possible. She starred in school plays, while I worked backstage, managing costumes and coordinating scene changes. The thing was, I started to notice something our parents missed. Rebecca was brilliant at inspiring people and articulating visions, but she struggled with the detailed work that made those visions reality. Her campaign promises rarely translated into actual policy changes. Her debate arguments were passionate, but often fell apart when opponents asked for specific supporting evidence. Her dramatic performances were captivating, but she frequently forgot her lines and relied on improvisation to cover the gaps. Meanwhile, I was developing a completely different skill set. I could see systems and understand how they functioned as integrated wholes.
When the peer tutoring program was failing, I didn't just motivate people to work harder, I analyzed why students weren't connecting with their tutors and redesigned the matching process based on learning styles and personality compatibility. Success rates increased by 60% in one semester. When the school's science fair was chaotic, I didn't give inspirational speeches about teamwork. I created a project timeline system and resource allocation protocol that eliminated conflicts and helped students produce higher quality work. 3 students from our school placed in the regional competition that year, compared to 0 the year before. But nobody called what I was doing leadership. They called it support work or administrative excellence. Rebecca got credit for the program improvements because she was the visible face announcing the successes, while I was the invisible engine making everything actually function. High school was where the inequality became impossible to ignore, though I was still too young to fully understand what was happening. Rebecca applied to prestigious summer programs, competitive internships, and leadership conferences. Our parents hired tutors for her SAT prep, paid for application consulting, and spent countless hours helping her craft essays about her vision for transformative leadership in the next generation. When it was my turn to think about extracurriculars and future planning, they suggested I focus on practical skills that would serve me well in any career. Nothing wrong with being dependable, they said. Not everyone needs to be in the spotlight. I ended up volunteering at Phoenix General Hospital, initially just filing paperwork and delivering patient meals. Rebecca was accepted into the National High School Leadership Institute, where she spent a summer at Georgetown University learning about public policy and international relations. Our parents threw a celebration dinner and invited the extended family to hear about her prestigious program. I spent that same summer shadowing nurses, observing surgeries when permitted, and gradually being given more responsibilities in the hospital's volunteer program. By the end of the summer, I was assisting with patient intake interviews and had been often offered a part position in the medical records department. No one threw me a celebration dinner. But what happened during those months at Phoenix General changed the entire trajectory of my life. I discovered that medicine wasn't just about helping people, it was about solving complex puzzles where the stakes were human lives. Every patient presented a unique combination of symptoms, medical history, and treatment variables that required both analytical thinking and intuitive problem solving.
Dr. Michael Chen, the cardiovascular surgeon who supervised my volunteer work, first noticed when I started asking questions that went beyond typical volunteer curiosity. Instead of just observing procedures, I wanted to understand the reasoning behind surgical decisions. Instead of just filing patient charts, I was reading them and beginning to recognize patterns in treatment outcomes. You see connections that most medical students don't notice until their 3rd year, he told me after I'd pointed out a correlation between patient recovery times and specific preoperative preparation protocols. Have you ever considered that medicine might be more than just a volunteer interest for you? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The conversation happened on a Tuesday afternoon in August, right before my senior year of high school. Dr. Chen and I were reviewing surgical schedules when I mentioned that I'd been tracking recovery statistics for his patients and noticed that certain preparation techniques seemed to correlate with faster healing times. Most people your age are focused on college applications and social events, he said, looking at the data analysis I'd compiled in my spare time. You're conducting independent research on surgical outcomes. That's not normal teenage behavior, Alice. That's the mindset of someone who's meant to be a physician. I didn't tell my family about that conversation. I didn't mention that Dr. Chen had offered to mentor me through the medical school application process, or that he'd introduced me to the hospital's pre-med advisor, or that I'd already started planning a course load that would prepare me for the MCAT. Instead, I went home and listened to Rebecca describe her Leadership Institute experience, where she'd networked with senators' children and developed a policy proposal that had been selected for presentation to a congressional subcommittee. You should really think about what you want to do after high school, she told me that night, unpacking souvenirs from Washington, D.C. I know it seems overwhelming, but there are community college programs that might be a good fit for you. Not everyone needs to go to a 4-year university right away.
I nodded and smiled, expressing appropriate admiration for her achievements, while privately reviewing the pre-med requirements for Johns Hopkins, Stanford, and Harvard Medical School. Because even then, I was learning the most important lesson of my life. People will underestimate you if you let them, and sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. Rebecca spent her senior year applying to Ivy League schools with full family support and professional college counseling. She was accepted to Yale, where she planned to study political science and international relations. Our parents couldn't contain their pride about their daughter, who was destined for law school and a career in public service. I spent my senior year maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working part-time at Phoenix General and completing an independent research project on cardiac surgery outcomes that impressed Dr. Chen enough to help me get it published in a regional medical journal. When I graduated as valedictorian with early admission to Stanford's pre-med program, we had dinner at a nice restaurant. But here's what nobody knew during those high school years. While Rebecca was building a network of future politicians and policymakers, I was building something much more substantial. The research project I'd completed wasn't just an impressive academic exercise. It was groundbreaking work that identified a surgical technique modification that could reduce patient recovery time by an average of 18%. Dr. Chen had been so impressed with my findings that he'd presented them at the Western States Cardiovascular Conference, where they'd been received as a significant contribution to the field. At 17 years old, I'd contributed research that was changing how surgeons approached postoperative care protocols. The night before I left for Stanford, Rebecca called me from her dorm room at Yale to give me advice about succeeding in college. The key is making yourself visible, she told me. Join clubs, network with professors, make sure people know who you are and what you're capable of. Don't just blend into the background like you did in high school. I thanked her for the advice while looking at the letter from Stanford's Cardiovascular Research Department inviting me to join their undergraduate research program based on my published work. What I didn't tell Rebecca was that I'd already learned something much more valuable than networking. The most powerful achievements aren't always the most visible ones, and sometimes the best strategy is to let everyone else fight for attention while you quietly build expertise that speaks for itself. Rebecca's first year at Yale was everything she'd imagined: prestigious lectures, influential professors, and social connections that would serve her well in whatever career she eventually chose. My first year at Stanford was everything I'd worked toward: advanced courses in molecular biology, hands-on research opportunities, and mentorship from physicians who were reshaping their fields. The foundation was set. Rebecca was building a career around visibility and networking, while I was building one around competence and results. Neither of us understood yet how dramatically our different approaches would affect the trajectories of our lives, or how the sister who seemed destined for greatness would eventually find herself seeking help from the sister she'd never taken seriously. College was where the real divergence began, though neither Rebecca nor I fully understood what was happening at the time. While she was thriving in Yale's political science program, building connections with future diplomats and policymakers, I was immersing myself in Stanford's rigorous pre-medical curriculum in ways that would fundamentally reshape my understanding of what I was capable of. My breakthrough moment came during my sophomore year in Dr. Sarah Martinez's Advanced Human Physiology class. We were studying cardiac arrhythmias when Dr. Martinez presented a case study about a patient whose irregular heartbeat patterns defied conventional diagnostic protocols. The patient had been through multiple specialists without a definitive treatment plan. While other students focused on memorizing textbook classifications of arrhythmias, I found myself obsessed with the anomalies in this particular case. I spent weeks in the medical library, cross-referencing research papers and building a comprehensive analysis of similar cases from medical journals spanning the past decade. What I discovered was that this patient's condition wasn't actually a single arrhythmia, but a combination of two rare cardiac issues that, when occurring simultaneously, created symptoms that mimicked a completely different condition. The misdiagnosis had led to inappropriate treatments that weren't addressing the root causes. When I presented my findings to Dr. Martinez, expecting her to acknowledge the academic exercise and move on, she stared at my research for several minutes before looking up at me with an expression I'd never seen from a professor.
Alice, this isn't undergraduate work, she said, flipping through the 20-page analysis I'd compiled. This is the kind of diagnostic thinking we expect from cardiology residents. You've identified a pattern that 3 different specialists missed. Dr. Martinez contacted the attending physician handling the case, Dr. James Wellington at Stanford Medical Center. My analysis was incorporated into the patient's treatment plan, and within 6 weeks, the patient's condition had stabilized using the dual therapy approach I'd recommended. It was the first time I'd directly contributed to saving someone's life, and the experience was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. This wasn't about academic achievement or professional recognition. It was about using analytical thinking to solve problems that had real, immediate consequences for human well-being. Dr. Wellington requested a meeting with me the following week. I expected a brief congratulations and maybe some encouragement to continue my studies. Instead, he offered me a research position in Stanford's Cardiovascular Institute, working directly with cases that stumped conventional diagnostic approaches. We see maybe 1 or 2 undergraduates per year who demonstrate this level of diagnostic intuition, he told me during that meeting. Most medical students don't develop this kind of analytical depth until their residency years. You're processing complex cardiac cases like someone who's been practicing medicine for a decade. The research position changed everything about my college experience. While my classmates were taking standard pre-med courses and volunteering at local clinics, I was working alongside residents and fellows on cases that were being written up for medical journals. I was attending surgical conferences where my research was being presented to cardiovascular surgeons from across the country. But the most significant development was that I was building relationships with physicians who would become crucial mentors in ways that went far beyond academic guidance. Dr. Wellington introduced me to Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the chief of cardiothoracic surgery, who became fascinated by my ability to identify surgical candidates who would benefit from innovative procedures that hadn't yet become standard practice. You see risk factors and recovery predictors that our computer models miss, Dr. Harper told me, after I'd correctly identified 3 patients who were ideal candidates for a new minimally invasive cardiac procedure. That's not something we can teach. That's intuitive clinical judgment, and it's rare even among experienced surgeons. By my junior year, I wasn't just studying medicine, I was contributing to its advancement in ways that were attracting attention from medical centers beyond Stanford. My research on postoperative recovery patterns had been published in the Journal of Cardiovascular Surgery, and I'd been invited to present findings at the National Conference on Cardiac Innovation. Meanwhile, Rebecca's college experience was unfolding exactly as she'd planned. She was president of Yale's International Relations Society, had interned with a Connecticut senator's office, and was already being recruited by prestigious law schools and consulting firms. Every family phone call included updates about her latest achievements, networking successes, and the influential people who were taking interest in her career. What our parents didn't know was that while Rebecca was building an impressive resume of leadership positions and political connections, I was building something much more substantial, expertise that was changing how major medical institutions approached complex cardiac cases. The turning point came during my senior year when Dr. Harper approached me with an opportunity that would accelerate my career in ways I'd never imagined possible. Stanford Medical Center was launching a new fellowship program designed to fast-track exceptional candidates through combined medical school and residency training. The program was specifically designed for students who'd already demonstrated advanced clinical judgment and research capabilities. Alice, this program typically accepts candidates who've completed medical school and shown exceptional performance during their residency years. But your undergraduate research and diagnostic work is already at the level we'd expect from second-year residents. We want to offer you direct admission to a track that would have you practicing cardiovascular surgery by age 26 instead of 30. The accelerated program was unprecedented, a combination of intensive medical school coursework, immediate hands-on clinical experience, and research responsibilities that would normally be reserved for much more advanced students. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that ambitious pre-med students dreamed about, but it came with a catch that would prove crucial to everything that happened later. The program required complete commitment to medical training, which meant no time for the kind of family updates and achievement announcements that had characterized my relationship with Rebecca throughout college.
While she was graduating from Yale with honors and celebrating her acceptance to Harvard Law School, I was beginning a medical training program so intensive that I essentially disappeared from family social events for the next several years. Alice is really focused on her studies, became our parents' standard explanation when relatives asked why I wasn't at family gatherings. She's always been the studious one. Rebecca gets her energy from people, but Alice prefers to work quietly on her own projects. What they didn't understand was that my quiet projects were becoming increasingly significant within the medical community. By my second year in the accelerated program, I was first author on research papers that were reshaping cardiac surgery protocols. By my third year, I was assisting in surgeries that were being filmed for medical training programs. By my fourth year, I was leading research initiatives that were attracting funding from national heart foundations. But the most important development during this period wasn't professional recognition. It was the deepening of my clinical expertise in ways that would prove crucial when family dynamics eventually forced our two worlds to collide. I was becoming the kind of surgeon that other surgeons consulted when they encountered cases that challenged conventional approaches. Dr. Harper had been right about my intuitive clinical judgment, but what neither of us had anticipated was how that intuition would develop through intensive training into something much more powerful: the ability to see treatment possibilities that others missed and to execute surgical procedures with precision that impressed even veteran surgeons. Alice doesn't just perform surgeries, Dr. Richard Kim, the department's senior attending, said during my evaluation in year 5. She improves them. Every procedure she's involved with becomes a learning opportunity for the entire surgical team because she identifies ways to optimize outcomes that we hadn't considered. This reputation for innovation and precision was attracting attention from medical centers across the country, but it was also creating opportunities for advancement that would eventually put me in a position Rebecca would never have anticipated. Because, while she was building a successful legal career focused on corporate litigation, I was building a medical career focused on saving lives in ways that were earning recognition from institutions she'd never heard of. The irony was that Rebecca's approach to career building, networking, visibility, prestigious positions, was exactly what medical institutions valued least. In medicine, reputation was built through patient outcomes, research contributions, and the respective peers who understood the technical complexities of the work.
By the time I completed the accelerated program at age 26, I wasn't just a qualified surgeon, I was a surgeon that senior physicians sought out for the most challenging cases. The foundation was being laid for a career trajectory that would eventually put me in rooms where life and death decisions were made daily, while Rebecca was building a career around conference rooms where contract disputes were resolved. Neither of us understood yet how dramatically these different approaches to professional development would affect our family dynamics, or how the sister who seemed destined for prestigious legal success would eventually find herself depending on the medical expertise of the sister whose achievements she'd never bothered to understand. My transition from promising resident to department leadership happened faster than anyone, including myself, had anticipated. What started as exceptional performance in complex surgical cases evolved into something much more significant: the ability to transform entire cardiac programs in ways that attracted national attention. The catalyst came during my first year as an attending surgeon at St. Margaret's Medical Center in Seattle. The hospital had recruited me specifically to help revitalize their struggling cardiovascular program, which had been losing patients to competing medical centers due to higher-than-average complication rates and longer recovery times. When I arrived, the cardiovascular department was functioning with outdated protocols, fragmented communication between surgical teams, and a culture that prioritized individual surgeon reputation over collaborative patient outcomes. It was exactly the kind of systemic challenge that my years of analytical thinking had prepared me to address, but on a scale that would test everything I'd learned about leadership through medicine rather than management theory. My first innovation wasn't a surgical technique, it was a comprehensive data analysis system that tracked patient outcomes across every stage of cardiac care, from initial consultation through post-operative recovery. While other departments relied on quarterly reports and subjective assessments, I implemented real-time monitoring that identified patterns in complications, recovery delays, and treatment effectiveness. The results were immediate and dramatic. Within 6 months, we'd identified 3 critical bottlenecks in our treatment protocols that were contributing to delayed diagnoses, extended hospital stays, and increased infection rates. More importantly, we developed targeted solutions that addressed each issue systematically rather than treating symptoms. Dr. Amanda Foster, St. Margaret's Chief of Medicine, first noticed when our cardiovascular mortality rates dropped by 23% in a single quarter, a statistical improvement that was unprecedented in the hospital's history. But what impressed her more than the numbers was the methodology behind them. Alice, this isn't just improved surgical performance, she told me during a department review meeting. This is healthcare innovation that other medical centers are going to want to replicate. You've essentially redesigned how cardiac care can be delivered more effectively. The recognition came faster than I'd expected. The American College of Cardiology invited me to present our outcomes data at their annual conference, where the response from department heads across the country was immediate and intense. Within 3 months of that presentation, I was fielding calls from medical centers in Boston, Chicago, and Los Angeles asking me to consult on their cardiovascular program improvements. But the opportunity that would change everything came from an unexpected source. Dr. Robert Hayes, the retiring head of cardiothoracic surgery at St. Margaret's. Dr. Hayes had built the department's reputation over 20 years, and his endorsement carried enormous weight within the medical community. Alice, I've been watching your work for the past 2 years, he told me during what I thought was a routine mentorship meeting. You've accomplished something that most department heads spend decades trying to achieve. You've proven that clinical excellence and operational innovation can be combined to create outcomes that exceed what either approach achieves alone. Dr. Hayes explained that the hospital's board was looking for his replacement, someone who could maintain the clinical standards he'd established while continuing the program improvements I'd initiated. The position would make me the youngest department head in St. Margaret's history, overseeing a team of 12 attending surgeons and responsible for a program that served over 3,000 cardiac patients annually. I'm recommending you for the position, he said, because you've demonstrated something rare in medicine, the ability to innovate without compromising patient safety and to lead without sacrificing the collaborative culture that makes excellent outcomes possible. The interview process was unlike anything I'd experienced in academic medicine. Instead of presenting research or discussing theoretical approaches to cardiac surgery, I was asked to analyze St. Margaret's 5-year strategic plan and propose specific improvements to their cardiac care delivery model. The presentation I delivered outlined a comprehensive vision for cardiovascular medicine that integrated advanced surgical techniques with predictive analytics, patient-centered care protocols, and interdisciplinary collaboration models that would position St. Margaret's as a national leader in cardiac outcomes. Dr. Thompson, this proposal essentially redesigned how we think about cardiac care, said Dr. Catherine Wells, the hospital's chief executive officer, after reviewing my presentation. You're not just suggesting improvements to existing systems, you're proposing a fundamental transformation of how we deliver cardiac services. The appointment was announced 3 weeks later. At age 29, I became the head of cardiothoracic surgery at St. Margaret's Medical Center, overseeing a department with an annual budget of $47 million and responsibility for cardiac care that would directly impact thousands of lives. But what made this achievement particularly significant wasn't just the professional recognition, it was the way it positioned me within the medical community as someone who could bridge the gap between clinical excellence and healthcare innovation. Within 6 months of my appointment, I was receiving consultation requests from medical centers across the Pacific Northwest, and my approaches to cardiac care were being studied and replicated at institutions from Vancouver to San Diego. The irony was that during this same period, Rebecca was achieving what she considered the pinnacle of her early career success. She'd been promoted to senior associate at Morrison, Blake & Associates, one of Seattle's most prestigious corporate law firms, specializing in healthcare litigation, the same field where she was building a reputation for defending medical institutions against malpractice claims. Our career trajectories had brought us to the same city, working in related fields, but moving in completely different professional circles. Rebecca was building her reputation in courtrooms and boardrooms, representing healthcare organizations in legal disputes. I was building mine in operating rooms and medical conferences, actually improving healthcare delivery in ways that reduced the likelihood of the legal problems Rebecca was paid to resolve.
The disconnect became apparent during one of our rare family phone calls when Rebecca mentioned a particularly challenging case she was working on involving a cardiac surgery gone wrong at a competing medical center. The plaintiff's attorneys are claiming that the hospital's cardiovascular department failed to follow standard protocols, she explained, clearly energized by the complex legal arguments involved.
But proving medical negligence requires understanding surgical procedures at a level that most lawyers never develop. I'm basically having to become an expert in cardiac surgery just to defend this case effectively. I listened to Rebecca describe the medical details she was learning for litigation purposes, details that represented the basic foundation of work I was performing daily, and realized that we were operating in completely different universes despite working in the same city. What Rebecca didn't know was that the competing medical center she was defending was actually implementing protocols I'd developed at St. Margaret's, and that several of their surgeons had attended conferences where I'd presented the innovations she was now studying for legal purposes. The gap between our professional worlds became even more pronounced when Rebecca started describing her frustrations with medical expert witnesses who couldn't explain complex cardiac procedures in ways that juries could understand. I keep telling these surgeons that they need to simplify their explanations, she said, but they seem incapable of translating medical concepts into language that normal people can follow. It's like they've forgotten how to communicate with anyone outside their profession. As Rebecca spoke, I was reviewing surgical schedules for procedures I'd be performing the following week, procedures that would require exactly the kind of technical expertise she was struggling to understand through legal briefs and expert testimony. The sister who was building her career around defending medical institutions had no idea that her own sister was leading innovations in the very field she was trying to master secondhand. But the most significant development during this period wasn't professional achievement. It was the growing recognition within Seattle's medical community that St. Margaret's cardiovascular program had become the regional standard for cardiac care excellence. We weren't just treating patients effectively, we were training surgeons, developing protocols, and conducting research that was influencing cardiac medicine across the Pacific Northwest. This reputation would prove crucial for everything that happened later, because it meant that when other medical professionals needed cardiac consultation or treatment, St. Margaret's, and specifically my department, was where they sent their most challenging cases. Including cases that would eventually bring my own family into the operating rooms where I was saving lives daily, while Rebecca continued building a legal career around problems I was helping to prevent. The first signs that Rebecca's carefully constructed professional life was about to intersect with mine in ways she never anticipated came through a series of phone calls that started in late March. What began as routine family check-ins gradually revealed health concerns that would eventually lead her directly into the operating rooms where I was performing the most complex cardiac procedures on the West Coast. It started with fatigue that Rebecca initially dismissed as the normal stress of managing high-stakes litigation cases. She'd been working 70-hour weeks on a particularly complex medical malpractice defense, and exhaustion seemed like an occupational hazard rather than a symptom of something more serious. "I'm just burning the candle at both ends," she told me during one of our monthly phone conversations. "Partner track at Morrison Blake requires this kind of commitment. Everyone expects you to sacrifice personal time for career advancement, especially in healthcare law, where the cases are so technically demanding." But over the next several weeks, Rebecca's complaints shifted from workplace stress to physical symptoms that were becoming harder to ignore. Shortness of breath during routine activities, chest tightness that wasn't relieved by rest, an irregular heartbeat that she noticed during stressful depositions and court appearances. "I'm probably just out of shape," she rationalized when I expressed concern about the symptoms she was describing. "Desk job, too much coffee, not enough exercise. I keep meaning to join a gym, but between case preparation and court appearances, I barely have time to sleep." What Rebecca didn't realize was that she was describing classic symptoms of cardiac arrhythmia, specifically the kind of complex rhythm disorders that had become my specialty within the cardiovascular surgery department. As she detailed her symptoms during our phone conversations, I was mentally conducting the same diagnostic analysis I used with patients who came to St. Margaret's emergency department with similar presentations. The turning point came during a particularly stressful court appearance in May. Rebecca was delivering closing arguments in a medical malpractice case when she experienced what she later described as the worst chest pain of my life, combined with dizziness and shortness of breath that made it difficult to continue speaking. The judge called a recess, and Rebecca's colleagues insisted she visit the emergency department at Seattle Presbyterian Hospital, where initial tests revealed irregular heart rhythms that required immediate cardiac consultation. The emergency physician, Dr. Mark Stevens, recommended that Rebecca follow up with a cardiologist within 48 hours to determine whether her symptoms indicated a serious underlying heart condition. "They're saying I might need to see a specialist," Rebecca told me that evening, and for the first time in our adult relationship, I heard genuine fear in her voice. The ER doctor mentioned something about arrhythmia and possible structural heart problems. I don't really understand what any of that means, but it sounds serious. I wanted to explain that arrhythmias could range from minor inconveniences to life-threatening conditions depending on their underlying causes, and that proper diagnosis required specialized testing that would determine the appropriate treatment approach. But doing so would have revealed a level of medical knowledge that Rebecca had no reason to expect from her sister, who worked in basic healthcare. Instead, I encouraged her to follow the emergency physician's recommendations and assured her that Seattle had excellent cardiac specialists who could provide the thorough evaluation she needed. What I didn't tell Rebecca was that Seattle Presbyterian Hospital had a standard referral protocol for complex cardiac cases. When their cardiologists encountered rhythm disorders that might require surgical intervention, they routinely referred patients to St. Margaret's Medical Center, where our cardiovascular department had developed advanced treatment protocols for exactly the kind of arrhythmias she was describing. Rebecca's cardiology appointment the following week confirmed the emergency physician's concerns. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a highly respected cardiologist at Seattle Presbyterian, conducted a comprehensive cardiac workup, including an echocardiogram, stress testing, and 24-hour rhythm monitoring that revealed a complex arrhythmia pattern requiring specialized treatment. Dr. Walsh says I have something called atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular response, Rebecca explained during our next phone conversation, carefully reading from notes she'd taken during the appointment. She's recommending that I see a cardiovascular surgeon for evaluation of treatment options, including possible surgical intervention. My heart rate increased as Rebecca described her diagnosis. Atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular response was exactly the kind of complex cardiac condition that required the specialized surgical techniques I'd spent years developing. Depending on the severity and underlying causes, treatment could range from minimally invasive catheter procedures to open-heart surgery requiring precise intervention techniques that few surgeons had mastered. "Did Dr. Walsh mention where she's referring you for the surgical consultation?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "She said the best cardiovascular surgery program in the region is at St. Margaret's Medical Center," Rebecca replied. "Apparently, they have some kind of specialized department that handles complex arrhythmia cases. She's referring me to the head of their cardiothoracic surgery department for evaluation." The moment Rebecca said head of their cardiothoracic surgery department, I realized that everything was converging exactly as I'd never imagined it could. My sister, who had spent years dismissing my medical career as basic healthcare work, was being referred directly to me for evaluation of a cardiac condition that fell squarely within my area of expertise. But what made this situation particularly complex wasn't just the medical aspects. It was the way Rebecca's approach to handling her diagnosis revealed the same patterns of assumption and dismissal that had characterized our relationship throughout our adult lives. "I'm not really worried about the surgery part," Rebecca told me with the same confidence she brought to legal challenges. "I mean, heart surgery is pretty routine these days, right? And I'll make sure to research the surgeon beforehand, check their credentials, maybe even consult with some of the medical expert witnesses I work with to make sure I'm getting the best possible care." As Rebecca outlined her strategy for managing her cardiac treatment, approaching it like a legal case that required due diligence and expert consultation, I realized that she had no concept of the complexity involved in the surgical procedures she might need, or the level of expertise required to perform them successfully. "The important thing is finding a surgeon who can explain the procedures clearly and work around my schedule," she continued. "I have 3 major cases going to trial over the next 6 months, so I need someone who understands that I can't just disappear from work for extended recovery periods." I wanted to explain that cardiac surgery timelines are determined by medical necessity rather than professional convenience, and that recovery periods are based on physiological healing processes that can't be negotiated like legal settlements. But doing so would have revealed knowledge that Rebecca had no reason to expect from someone she considered medically uninformed. Instead, I encouraged her to trust Dr. Walsh's referral and to approach the surgical consultation with an open mind about treatment recommendations. What Rebecca didn't know was that her appointment with the head of cardiothoracic surgery at St. Margaret's Medical Center was already scheduled in my calendar for the following Tuesday at 3 p.m. She didn't know that the surgeon she was planning to research and evaluate was the same sister whose medical career she'd never taken seriously enough to understand. Most importantly, she didn't know that the complex arrhythmia requiring specialized surgical intervention was exactly the kind of condition I'd built my reputation treating, and that the success of her treatment would depend on surgical techniques I'd spent the past decade perfecting. The irony was complete. Rebecca, who had built her legal career defending medical institutions against malpractice claims, was about to become a patient requiring the kind of advanced cardiac care she'd spent years studying from the outside, delivered by the sister whose medical expertise she'd never bothered to recognize. In less than a week, Rebecca would walk into my consultation office expecting to meet with a cardiovascular surgeon she could evaluate and manage like any other professional service provider. Instead, she would discover that her life was literally in the hands of the sister she'd spent years treating as professionally insignificant. The stage was set for a revelation that would change not just our family relationship, but Rebecca's entire understanding of expertise, achievement, and the quiet competence she'd mistaken for lack of ambition. The consultation room felt different that Tuesday afternoon as I waited for Rebecca to arrive. I'd conducted thousands of patient consultations over the years, but none where the person walking through my door would be experiencing the complete destruction of every assumption they'd made about my professional capabilities. I could hear Rebecca's voice in the hallway outside my office as she spoke with my medical assistant, Jennifer Rodriguez. Even through the closed door, I recognized the tone she used when she was trying to establish control over a situation, confident, slightly commanding, the voice of someone accustomed to being the most accomplished person in the room. I have some specific questions about Dr. Thompson's background and surgical experience, Rebecca was saying. I've done some preliminary research, but I'd like to understand their approach to complex arrhythmia cases before we begin the consultation. Jennifer's response was polite but measured, explaining that Dr. Thompson would be happy to discuss qualifications and treatment approaches during the consultation itself. What Rebecca didn't know was that Jennifer had been briefed about the family relationship and was carefully avoiding any details that might reveal my identity before the formal introduction. When Jennifer knocked and announced that Miss Thompson had arrived for her 3 p.m. appointment, I took a deep breath and prepared for a conversation that would fundamentally alter the dynamic between Rebecca and me. The medical aspects of her consultation would be straightforward. Her cardiac condition was serious but treatable using techniques I'd performed successfully hundreds of times. The personal aspects would be far more complex. "Please send her in," I said, straightening the white coat that bore my name and title, Dr. Alice Thompson, Head of Cardiothoracic Surgery. The door opened, and Rebecca walked in with the same confident stride she'd perfected during years of high-stakes legal proceedings. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected professional authority, carrying a leather portfolio that undoubtedly contained research about cardiovascular surgery, questions about treatment options, and notes about how to manage this medical consultation like any other professional engagement. She was looking down at her phone, probably reviewing the notes she'd prepared, when she glanced up and saw me sitting behind the consultation desk. The transformation was instantaneous and more dramatic than anything I'd witnessed during our decades as sisters. Her confident expression froze completely. Her eyes went wide, scanning the office as if she'd entered the wrong building. She looked at the diplomas on my wall, Stanford Medical School, American Board of Thoracic Surgery certification, fellowship credentials from Johns Hopkins, then back at me, then at the nameplate on my desk that read Dr. Alice Thompson, MD, Head of Cardiothoracic Surgery. Alice? Her voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it, barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk with the same professional demeanor I used with every patient consultation. "Hello, Rebecca. Please have a seat. I understand Dr. Walsh has referred you for evaluation of your atrial fibrillation." Rebecca remained frozen in the doorway, her portfolio clutched against her chest like a shield. "But you work in basic healthcare," she said, as if stating this fact might somehow change the reality of what she was seeing. "You told me you worked at a hospital doing administrative work." "I do work at a hospital," I replied calmly, picking up her referral file from my desk. "St. Margaret's Medical Center, and I do handle administrative responsibilities. I oversee the entire cardiothoracic surgery department. I also perform approximately 200 cardiac surgeries per year, including complex arrhythmia procedures like the one you may need." The color was slowly draining from Rebecca's face as she processed this information. She took a tentative step into the office, then another, like someone walking through a dream sequence that defied logical explanation. "You're a surgeon?" she asked, though the evidence was surrounding her on every wall. "You're the head of cardiovascular surgery?" "I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon, yes. I've been practicing for 8 years, and I've been department head here for 3 years." I kept my voice professional, neutral. "According to Dr. Walsh's referral, you've been experiencing symptoms of atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular response. Shall we discuss your treatment options?" Rebecca finally made it to the chair but didn't sit down. Instead, she gripped the back of it like she needed something solid to hold on to. "This is impossible. When did you become a surgeon? How long have you been doing this?" "I completed my medical degree and surgical residency through Stanford's accelerated program. I've been specializing in cardiac arrhythmia procedures for the past 6 years." I paused, letting that timeline sink in. "But Rebecca, we're here to discuss your health. Your symptoms indicate a serious cardiac condition that requires immediate attention." She sat down heavily, her polished composure completely shattered. For the first time in our adult relationship, Rebecca looked genuinely vulnerable, and not just because of her medical condition. "How is this possible? Why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you let me think you were doing basic hospital work?" "I do work at a hospital," I replied calmly, picking up her referral file from my desk. "St. Margaret's Medical Center. And I do handle administrative responsibilities. I oversee the entire cardiovascular surgery department. I also perform approximately 200 cardiac surgeries per year, including complex arrhythmia procedures like the one you may need." The color was slowly draining from Rebecca's face as she processed this information. She took a tentative step into the office, then another, like someone walking through a dream sequence that defied logical explanation. "You're a surgeon?" she asked, though the evidence was surrounding her on every wall. "You're the head of cardiovascular surgery?" "I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon, yes. I've been practicing for 8 years, and I've been department head here for 3 years. I kept my voice professional, neutral. "According to Dr. Walsh's referral, you've been experiencing symptoms of atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular response. Shall we discuss your treatment options?" Rebecca finally made it to the chair but didn't sit down. Instead, she gripped the back of it like she needed something solid to hold on to. "This is impossible. When did you become a surgeon? How long have you been doing this?" "I completed my medical degree and surgical residency through Stanford's accelerated program. I've been specializing in cardiac arrhythmia procedures for the past 6 years." I paused, letting that timeline sink in. "But Rebecca, we're here to discuss your health. Your symptoms indicate a serious cardiac condition that requires immediate attention." She sat down heavily, her polished composure completely shattered. For the first time in our adult relationship, Rebecca looked genuinely vulnerable, and not just because of her medical condition. "How is this possible? Why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you let me think you were doing basic hospital work?"
"I never lied to you about my work," I said directly. "I told you I worked in healthcare. I told you I was involved in patient care. You made assumptions about what that meant, and I didn't correct them." Rebecca's hands were shaking slightly as she opened her portfolio, which I could now see contained printed pages about cardiovascular surgery procedures, surgeon credentials, and questions she'd prepared for evaluating the competence of the specialist she'd expected to meet. "Alice, I don't understand. If you're the head of cardiac surgery at one of the region's top medical centers, why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you let everyone think—" She stopped herself before finishing the sentence. "Let everyone think what?" I met her eyes directly. "That I was unsuccessful? That I lacked ambition? That I was settling for mediocrity? I quoted her exact words from previous conversations, watching her wince at the recognition. I didn't mean, she started, then stopped. I mean, I never imagined that you were doing this level of work. When you said you worked in healthcare, I thought you meant nursing or administration or something supportive. Something that wouldn't threaten your position as the successful sister? I asked, though my tone remained clinical rather than accusatory. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the revelation about my career, but the implications of everything she'd said and assumed over the years. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight I'd never heard from her before. All those times I talked about my cases, my legal work with medical malpractice, she said slowly, you were listening to me describe basic legal concepts about medicine while you were actually practicing at a level I was just learning about secondhand. I nodded. Many of the surgical procedures you've studied for litigation purposes, I perform regularly. The expert testimony you've struggled to understand, I could have explained in detail. The medical standards you've argued about in court, I helped develop. And you never said anything. She wasn't accusatory now, just amazed. You let me go on and on about my expertise in healthcare law while you were actually saving lives. Rebecca, I need you to understand something, I said, leaning forward slightly. This consultation isn't about our family history or career comparisons. You have a serious cardiac condition that requires surgical intervention. Your symptoms indicate that your heart's electrical system is malfunctioning in ways that could become life-threatening without proper treatment. The shift back to medical reality seemed to ground Rebecca somewhat. She looked at her portfolio of research, then back at me. So you're telling me that the surgeon I came here to evaluate for my heart condition is my sister, who I've been treating like she was professionally unsuccessful for the past decade? I'm telling you that I'm qualified to treat your condition and that your symptoms require immediate attention regardless of our family relationship. I opened her medical file. Dr. Walsh's tests show that you have complex atrial fibrillation that hasn't responded to medication. The irregular rhythms you've been experiencing are putting significant strain on your heart and increasing your risk of stroke or cardiac arrest. Rebecca stared at me for several seconds before asking the question I'd been expecting. What does that mean for treatment? What kind of surgery are we talking about? That depends on several factors we'll need to determine through additional testing. Treatment options range from minimally invasive catheter procedures to more complex surgical interventions, depending on the underlying causes of your arrhythmia and your overall cardiac health. And you've performed these procedures before? I've performed over 800 cardiac arrhythmia procedures during my career. The specific technique you'll likely need is one I've refined and taught to other surgeons across the region. I paused. Rebecca, I want you to understand that this consultation is completely separate from our personal relationship. If you're not comfortable having me as your surgeon, I can refer you to other qualified specialists. She was quiet for almost a minute, and I can see her wrestling with the complete reversal of everything she thought she knew about our relationship and my capabilities. Are you the best option for this type of surgery? She asked finally. Based on outcome statistics and the complexity of cases I handle, yes. St. Margaret's has the lowest complication rates for arrhythmia surgery in the Pacific Northwest, and I personally perform the majority of those procedures. Rebecca looked at her hands, then back at me. The sister I thought was settling for mediocrity is actually the expert I need to save my life. The sister you thought was unsuccessful is the surgeon who can fix your heart, I corrected gently. The question is whether you trust me to do it. 3 months after Rebecca's surgery, I was reviewing post-operative follow-up reports in my office when she knocked on my door for what had become our monthly check-in appointment. But the woman who entered my office bore little resemblance to the sister who had walked in for that first consultation, either in terms of her physical health or her approach to our relationship.
The surgery itself had been more complex than initially anticipated. Rebecca's arrhythmia had been caused by multiple electrical pathway abnormalities that required a combination of catheter ablation and surgical intervention techniques I'd been developing for particularly challenging cases. The procedure took 4 hours and required the kind of precision work that demonstrated exactly why St. Margaret's had become the regional referral center for complex cardiac cases. But what had transformed more dramatically than Rebecca's heart rhythm was her understanding of expertise, achievement, and the assumptions she'd spent years making about success and professional value. The final test results came back perfect, Rebecca said, settling into the chair across from my desk with an ease that had replaced her previous discomfort with our professional dynamic. Dr. Martinez said my heart rhythm is completely normal now, and I can return to full activity without restrictions. I reviewed her cardiac monitoring reports, which showed sustained normal sinus rhythm for the past 6 weeks, exactly the outcome we'd expected from the surgical intervention. Your recovery has been textbook perfect, I told her. The electrical pathways we corrected are functioning exactly as they should, and there's no indication of any residual arrhythmia. What I didn't mention was that Rebecca's case had become a teaching example I was using in cardiac surgery conferences across the country. The combination of techniques required for her particular arrhythmia pattern had resulted in outcomes that were being studied by other cardiovascular programs as a model for treating similar complex cases. Alice, I need to tell you something, Rebecca said, and her tone had the serious quality that had replaced her previous tendency to dominate conversations with her own achievements. This whole experience has changed how I think about everything, not just my health, but my career, our relationship, and what I thought I understood about success. I set down her medical files and gave her my complete attention, because over the past 3 months, I'd watched Rebecca undergo a transformation that went far beyond physical healing. What do you mean? I mean that lying in that hospital bed after surgery, knowing that my life had been saved by techniques you'd developed, made me realize how completely wrong I'd been about almost everything. Rebecca's voice carried a humility I'd never heard from her before. I spent years thinking I was the successful sister because I had visible achievements and prestigious job titles, while you were actually building expertise that saves lives. This level of self-reflection from Rebecca represented a fundamental shift in how she understood professional value. During her recovery, she'd spent considerable time researching my actual career achievements, the research publications, the surgical innovations, the national recognition I'd received within the cardiovascular surgery community. I looked up your publications, she continued. I read about the surgical techniques you've developed. I found articles about how St. Margaret's cardiac program became the regional leader under your direction. Alice, you've accomplished things that actually matter in ways I never even understood were possible. What Rebecca had discovered during her research was that while she'd been building a successful legal career defending medical institutions, I'd been building innovations that prevented the kinds of medical errors she was paid to litigate. While she'd been studying cardiac surgery secondhand for legal purposes, I'd been advancing the field through direct clinical work that was changing how complex arrhythmias were treated. But what bothers me most, Rebecca said, is how I treated you during all those years when you were developing this expertise. Every family dinner where I dominated the conversation with my legal achievements while you sat quietly, every time I made assumptions about your career limitations, every comment about settling for mediocrity or lacking ambition. I had to acknowledge that those years of family dynamics had been difficult, but what I'd learned through medical training was that the most important outcomes weren't always the most visible ones. Rebecca, I made a choice to focus on building competence rather than managing perceptions. That choice served me well professionally, even if it meant enduring assumptions about my success. But you let me make those assumptions for years, she said. You never corrected me when I was completely wrong about what you were accomplishing. I let you make those assumptions because correcting them wasn't necessary for me to do the work I cared about, I explained. My patients' outcomes weren't affected by whether you understood my qualifications. My research wasn't less valuable because our family didn't recognize it. My surgical skills weren't diminished by your assumptions about my career trajectory. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, processing this perspective on professional validation and family dynamics. When she spoke again, her question surprised me. How do you handle it now, though, knowing that I spent all those years being wrong about something so fundamental? I handle it by focusing on the fact that you're alive and healthy because of surgical techniques I've spent my career developing, I said directly. I handle it by recognizing that expertise speaks for itself when it matters most.
And I handle it by appreciating that you've learned something valuable about appearing successful and actually creating value. This conversation was taking place against the backdrop of changes in Rebecca's own career that demonstrated how profoundly the experience had affected her approach to professional work. She'd made significant modifications to her legal practice, shifting away from medical malpractice defense toward healthcare policy work that focused on improving patient safety and medical outcomes. I can't go back to defending medical institutions against patients who were harmed by preventable errors, she told me. Not when I understand now what excellence in healthcare actually looks like. I want to work on legal frameworks that support the kind of medical innovation you're doing, rather than just protecting institutions when things go wrong.
The career change Rebecca was describing represented more than just a shift in legal specialization. It was a complete reorientation toward using her professional skills to support the kind of work she now understood actually improved people's lives. I'm also handling family relationships differently, she continued. I've stopped assuming I understand what other people are accomplishing based on how visible their achievements are. I've started asking better questions and listening more carefully to answers. This change in Rebecca's approach to family dynamics had been noticeable during recent family gatherings, where she'd begun asking genuine questions about our parents' work, our cousins' careers, and other relatives' professional activities, instead of dominating conversations with her own updates. "What's next for you professionally?" I asked, because I was genuinely curious about how this transformation would influence her long-term career goals. "I'm working with a healthcare policy firm that specializes in supporting medical research and innovation," Rebecca said with an enthusiasm that reminded me of her old confidence but grounded in something more substantial. "They've offered me a partnership track focusing on legal frameworks that help medical centers like St. Margaret's expand their research and clinical programs." The work Rebecca was describing would involve supporting exactly the kind of medical innovation I was conducting, helping to navigate regulatory requirements, intellectual property issues, and institutional partnerships that enabled cutting-edge medical research to benefit more patients. "It's funny," she said. "I'm finally using my legal expertise to support the kind of work you've been doing all along. Instead of defending healthcare after problems occur, I'm helping create conditions where problems are less likely to happen in the first place." As Rebecca described her new career direction, I realized that this story wasn't just about a medical revelation or family dynamics. It was about something more fundamental: the difference between building a career around recognition and building one around contribution. "Alice, I have one more question," Rebecca said as our appointment was concluding. "If you could go back and handle our family relationship differently over the past decade, would you change anything?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "I might have been more direct about correcting your assumptions, but I'm not sure that would have led to the same kind of profound understanding you've gained through this experience. Sometimes people need to discover expertise in action rather than just being told about it." Rebecca smiled, and it was the same kind of relieved, genuine expression she'd had when I offered her life-saving surgery. "Thank you for being patient with me while I figured out what actually matters." As Rebecca left my office that day, I reflected on how this experience had changed both of us. She'd learned to recognize and value expertise that wasn't performed for audiences. I'd learned that sometimes the most satisfying professional achievement isn't proving someone wrong, it's helping them become more right about what matters. The sister who once mocked my dead-end job was now building her career around supporting the exact kind of medical work I was doing. The family dynamics that once made me feel invisible had evolved into a collaboration based on mutual respect for each other's actual contributions. Most importantly, the business of saving lives had proven to be more rewarding than any amount of recognition or professional validation. Because at the end of the day, Rebecca was alive and thriving because of surgical expertise I'd built quietly, without fanfare, while she was achieving the kind of visible success that had temporarily blinded both of us to what really mattered. The best professional victories aren't about beating your critics. They're about becoming so good at creating value that criticism becomes irrelevant. And sometimes, if you're really fortunate, your biggest critic becomes your greatest advocate for the work that actually makes a difference in the world.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.